Now that you've finished the funeral exercise, hopefully you can, now that you've had some time to think about what you really want your life to look like. It's so easy with what goes on and how busy we get day in and day out to not really think about if we're headed down the right path. And so, thinking about your funeral and the end of your journey will hopefully help you frame the rest of our discussion when it begins, what it means to begin with the end in mind. Although habit 2 applies to many different circumstances and levels, the most fundamental application is to begin today with the image at the end of your life as you frame or reference the criterion by which everything else is examined. By keeping that end clearly in your mind, you can make certain that whatever you do on any particular day does not violate the criteria you have defined as supremely important. It also helps make sure that each day of your life contributes in a meaningful way to the vision you have of your life as a whole. It's so incredibly easy to get caught up in activity traps in our busyness of life, putting out daily fires in our life, to work harder and harder at climbing the ladder of success, only to discover that the ladder might be leaning against the wrong wall. It's possible to be busy but not be effective. People often find themselves achieving victories that are empty. Successes come at the expense of things they suddenly realize were much more important. People from every walk of life struggle to achieve a higher income, more recognition, or a certain degree of professional competence. And then they find that their drive to achieve blinded them to the things that matter most. And now those things are gone. Habit 2 starts with this idea that all things are created twice. When we begin with the end in mind, it's based on the principle that all things are created 2 times. There's a mental or first creation, and then a physical or a second creation. You can drop a blueprint before you build a house. You read a recipe before you bake a cake. You create an outline before you write a paper. By design or by default, it's a principle that all things are created twice, but not all creations are by conscious design in our personal lives. If we do not develop our own self awareness and become responsible for our first creations, we empower other people and circumstances outside our circle of influence to shape much of our lives by default. We reactively live the scripts handed to us by other people's agendas, the pressure of circumstance, these scripts from our earlier years, training, and conditioning. These scripts come from people, not principles, and they rise out of our deep vulnerabilities, dependency on others, our needs for acceptance, our love for belonging, for a sense of importance and worth, for feeling that we matter, whether we are aware of it or not, whether are in control of it or not. There is a first creation to every part of our lives. We are either the second creation of our own proactive design, or we are the second creation of other people's agendas, circumstances, or past habits. Habit 1 says you are the creator. Habit 2 is the first creation. Now we look at leadership and management. Habit 2 is based on the principles of personal leadership, which means leadership is the first creation. Leadership is not management. Management is the second creation. Leadership comes first. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Management is efficiency in climbing the ladder of success. Leadership determines whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. And finally, I want to talk about the process of rescripting. This is about becoming your own first creator. Productivity is based on the unique human endowment of self-awareness. The two additional unique human endowments that enable us to expand our productivity and to exercise personal leadership in our lives are imagination and conscience. Through imagination, we can visualize uncreated worlds of potential that lie within us. Through conscience, we can come into contact with universal laws and principles, with our own singular talents and avenues of contribution. And with a personal guidance within these, we can most effectively develop because we already live with many scripts that have been handed to us. The process of writing our own script is actually more a process of rescripting or paradigm shifting, of changing some of the basic paradigms that we already have when we talk about rescripting. I also think of it as reframing. I'd like to read something from the 7 Habits book. I think one of the most inspiring accounts of rescripting process comes from the autobiography of Anwar Sadat, past president of Egypt. Sadat had been reared, nurtured, and deeply scripted in a hatred for Israel. He would make the statement on national television: I will never shake the hand of an Israeli as long as they occupy 1 inch of Arab soil. Never, never, never. And huge crowds all around the country would chant, never, never, never. He marshaled the energy and unified the will of the whole country in that script. That script was very independent and nationalistic, and it aroused deep emotions of people, but it was also very foolish, and Sadat knew it. It ignored the perilous, highly independent reality of a situation, so he rescripted himself. It was a process that he had learned when he was a young man, imprisoned in cell 54, a solitary cell in Cairo Central Prison, and this was a result of his involvement in a conspiracy plot against King Farouk. He learned to withdraw from his own mind and to look at it and see if the scripts were appropriate and wise. He learned to use the process of personal meditation to work with his own scriptures, his own form of prayer, to rescript himself. He records that he was almost loath to leave his prison cell because it was there he realized that real success is success with self. It's not in having things, but in having mastery, having victory over self. For a period of time during Nasser's administration, Sadat was relegated to a position of relative insignificance. Everyone felt that his spirit was broken, but it wasn't. They were projecting their own home movies onto him. They didn't understand him. He was biding his time, and when that time came, he became the president of Egypt and confronted the political realities. He rescripted himself toward Israel. He visited Jerusalem and opened up one of the most precedent-breaking peace movements in the history of the world, a bold initiative that eventually brought about the Camp David Accord. Sadat was able to use his self-awareness, his imagination, and his conscience to exercise personal leadership, to change an essential paradigm, to change the way he saw a situation. He worked in the center of his influence, and from that rescripting, that change in paradigm flowed changes in his behavior and attitude that affected millions of lives in the wider circle of concern with that information. I'd like you to go to the worksheet called Influential People, and I would like you to take the time to go through this worksheet now. In this worksheet, you're going to look at the people that have mattered to you, who have affected your life for good, and who have been a positive influence. And then I want you to list the qualities you admire most about them and any qualities that you've actually gained from being around or being influenced by this person. When you complete the exercise, come back to part 3.